Welcome to episode number 29 of Pernicious Chattel. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. This episode I'm trying to make short and tight, or at least tight as I possibly can, and it's going to be a little bit ranty. But I'm going to allow a little bit of my frustration to show through. If you like this style, or if you don't, I'd appreciate your feedback. With no further ado, let's get at her. Many of us are delusional about reality. We believe, despite heaps of scientific evidence, that we are discrete beings. We believe that we live a unique, unassailable, and singular experience. We believe that we possess free will. If we are influenced by others, oh, the horror, it's only with our own acquiescence. Whether because of preferred choice, the result of some fraud, or because of duress, we believe that our decision precedes every action that we take. A moment where we went from solid, immovable concrete to a weather vane pivoting in the wind because of circumstances. Circumstances solely and unquestionably personal to us. But to ponder the unvarnished reality of human existence, freed from all delusions, is for many people a horrifying experience. I mean, truly horrifying, like as horrifying as watching porn with your mom. Reality requires facing the truth. We aren't free agents at all. We aren't some ubermensch struggling mightily down the twisty mountain ledge. We aren't some Shapiroid dweebishly rising above feelings to embrace facts. We are largely a product of our environment. Our friends and family, our genes, our past, and the current biochemical brain soup splashing about in a pre-programmed script. We are unique enough to be surprising, and mostly predictable enough to be laughable. We may be a tree-loving green goofball, or we may be a Thatcherite neo-Nazi in blazer and cotton trousers. But for all our claimed individualism, we are only another output of a human social superorganism, with many near clones popping up on the regular. Regardless of how we feel or what we might accomplish, we are currently and will remain as unique as any of the millions of swimmers in any teenage boy's nightly emissions. Our tail may be kinked, or we might have been the first one out of the end of his fleshy appendage. We might be the biggest in this rapidly drying puddle, but ultimately none of us had any choice in our boy's aim. Each of us may be slightly different from the others, but we all live dependent on the same gray ejaculated goop of amino acids, fructose, and mucus. Devoid of any researcher's microscope, we're all just the same gooey sameness. A pile of intention, of emotions, but with extremely little agency. And that's just it. That is the all of it. The whole and entire distinction between the lefty and the righty, the progressive and the conservative, the socialist and the libertarian, the anarchist and the fascist. At its core, at the very heart of the matter, there are those who recognize their dependence and those who don't. There are those who accept their limitations and those who don't. There are those who accept their responsibility to others and those who don't. There are those who think of their community and those who preserve their precious feelings at all costs. Those willing to accept sacrifice and those who willingly become cruel rather than risk their oh so fragile delusions. There are those who want a better world even if it means kicking the powerful in their oh so white testicles, and those so invested in protecting their own middling privilege that they'd happily gargle those aforementioned pasty balls. Now I know I'm being mean-spirited and judgmental, but I choose to live in reality. We are intrinsically, inescapably, and deeply social creatures. We may find the organizational hierarchy of an ant colony disturbing, and the rigid conformity of Asian communism the stuff of nightmare. But aside from our own fantastically entertaining inner monologue, we are no more independent than a drone ant or conformist commie. Scientific research in recent years has made this an undeniable fact. We've known since the mid-20th century that children are not only dependent on parents for food and shelter, but dependent on the emotional intimacy. To ignore a baby is to doom it to intense suffering and death. This dependence isn't a childhood need that is discarded with adulthood. John Bowlby, a leading researcher into human relationships, wrote, quote, "From these small beginnings spring all the highly discriminating and sophisticated systems that in later infancy and childhood, indeed for the rest of life, mediate attachment." Close quote. The instant we become vaguely aware, likely in the final trimester of gestation, to the final instant when awareness leaves us for good, we need other humans. If the first contacts are with healthy, supportive caregivers, our life will be much easier. But if first contact is in any way dysfunctional, then the rest of life becomes much, much harder. So for the simple luck of being born with the right genes, in the right family, in the right geography, and in the right decade, we may be set on a relatively easy path. But bad luck is just as mathematically likely to put you in the wrong arms, in the wrong house, on the wrong block, country, or continent, and you get to walk a much harder path. Even the cruelest of conservatives might acknowledge these realities for children, but immediately zero everyone's scoreboard the second they turn 18. When these Reaganites begin to pontificate on individual responsibility, you know they buried their pointy heads deep into their delusions. Early childhood trauma and early childhood neglect are extremely common, and even more so in low-income families. This isn't a moral issue, but one arising out of the ugly reality of poverty. The pressures of poverty increase abuse, and childhood abuse tends to make poverty chronic. Abuse and poverty is a self-replicating system of dysfunction. If you're abused and ignored, you are at a disadvantage, more likely to abuse or neglect your children and more likely to end up in poverty yourself. Even those who aren't necessarily violent are prone to alcoholism, drug addiction, and mental health issues. Each of those disorders make poverty likely, while also causing homes to descend into destructive, damaging behaviors. None of this is surprising or new information, but even armed with this knowledge, we expect the poor to pull up their socks and navigate their way out of the part torture garden, part penitentiary slum that they've been born into. But let's say you manage to avoid the biggest cliffs that outline every corner of a poor childhood. Let's say you manage through sheer luck to tap dance your way through the minefield of a poor adolescence. Then of course, with a little pluck and willpower, you can do better than your parents, right? Yeah, no, not so fast, Ann Coulter. Broken attachment behavior learned in childhood continues throughout your entire life. Our ability to form flexible, resilient, and healthy attachments, romantic, friendly, or familial, are absolutely critical to any shot at achieving happiness and to achieving a stable psychology. Our aforementioned neocon, libertarian, bootstrapian claims willpower and work ethic as the only ticket necessary. Like, just roll up your sleeves and get to it, you lazy layabout. Never mind that a stable psychology is a critical precondition to a reliable willpower or a reliable work ethic. We all know that wishing and working itself isn't enough. You need education and training. These are critical to opening the necessary doors. Sure, Lauren Boebert managed to get ahead by fucking a sex offender and future oil consultant, but we all can't be a pretty bobblehead with no shame. If you're not able to fuck your way to some cash, then you'll probably need some academic credentials. Poverty puts you at a massive disadvantage in education. You may be the most enthusiastic in your class, but you're probably also the least prepared and capable, simply because your situation disables the critical physical and mental systems you need to concentrate. There are, of course, exceptional people, those magical creatures who can rise above their circumstances. The good student who, despite poverty, despite race, despite horrid family dynamics, somehow manages to escape stress and distraction to achieve good grades. maybe even, astonishingly, finds enough money to get a degree or two. These are the heroes of the right, the self-made men who rise like Murdochian phoenixes from their circumstances and succeed, the exceptions that give poverty phobes a convenient off-ramp detour to avoid being accused of hating the poor. Yeah, but look at J.D. Vance. He got a Yale law degree after being raised by dysfunctional hillbillies. It's all about choice. This is America and anyone can do it. But the exception in this case is the exception that proves the rule. What you need, that J.D. Vance has in bucket loads, is an ability to form close friendships with the right people. So after you've escaped family dysfunction and trauma, avoided drugs and alcohol, managed to succeed in school, then you just have to build supportive relationships and a success network. Just contain your dreadful attachment skills, your damaged sense of self, your lack of early socialization, your emotional deregulations, and all that shit, without professional help because you can't afford it, while at the same time build strong friendships with the right people. Overcoming poverty means building connections in a society where your background is seen as defining your character. It means forgetting your early life, your presumed stupidity, and untrustworthy status. It means deploying incredible willpower to overcome interpersonal trauma and plumb chasms of terrifying vulnerability necessary to real human connections. It means taking these personal risks when you know that your foundation is weak and failure is endlessly painful. It means walking up a mountain when your capitalist competitors are often walking up a slight grade. So, it isn't government assistance programs that creates a permanent underclass. Milton, you overeducated, delusional nincompoop. It isn't lack of character, despite whatever garbage your average, ironically named and billionaire-funded think tank might spout. It isn't about race either, Dr. Watson, you Nobel-winning racist shitheel. Despite what our dear dumbasses at the Heritage Foundation and the Fraser Institute or other neocon rat warrens believe, yes, there is real poverty in North America and Europe. And you don't need to be starving to be at a huge disadvantage. Relative economic disadvantage brings with it the same crippling effects as absolute poverty. But then you'd know that if you'd done any genuine research before publishing your latest press release from the Prince Andrew Room in Trump Towers, or whatever skeezy building that welcomes your occupancy. Poverty causes poverty. Capitalism is perfectly happy with that. After all, you can't be rich unless there is someone poor to compare yourself against. But to finish where I started, we're social animals. And as long as a portion of our community suffers, so do we all. Maybe a little more or less depending on your individual sensitivity, but just like living with an overflowing garbage can, a community that ignores poverty is living with pollution. Without helping the disadvantaged to find a better way, without spending on education, mental health care, welfare payments, without accepting everyone into our neighborhoods, and without making everyone feel comfortable in our shops, our parks, and our community centers, things are going to continue to stink. You can delude yourself. You can join the freaks, the geeks, and the shills who spout various cockeyed theories based on half-truths or outright lies. You can try to convince yourself how the poor are at fault for their suffering. You can decide to believe that you deserve your wealth. You earned your comfort and built your security. You can decide to believe that you are morally superior to the poor. But then you need to also decide that your house will always stink. The choice is yours. This is XCG, and I'm wishing you a short, glorious glide down that roller derby rink to freedom.